How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Monday night, 6th night of Hanukkah and Rosh Chodesh, beginning of the new Hebrew month of Teves. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Steven in New Hampshire, Hood in South Carolina, Bill in Missouri, Shandor in the Bronx, Guy in Ohio, Jonathan in SoCal, Bella in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Melissa in Great Neck, Karen in Northern California, Sharon in New Jersey, John in Maine, Lorraine in Texas, Lucy in Minnesota, Franco in Trieste, Italy, Ella in Southern California, Marjorie in Georgia, James in Indianapolis, Alan in New York City. Welcome, everybody. Tonight's episode of AT Daily, sponsored by Bill, and I apologize if I'm pronouncing it wrong, Bill Kabaker or Bill Kabaker. I'm not sure. Kabaker. Kabaker. Somebody's familiar with the name and how to pronounce it, let me know. But I'm going with Bill Kabaker in honor of his mom, Betty Kabaker. May you and your mom and all your loved ones be showered in blessings. Bill, thank you for enabling us to share more Torah with more people around the world. And that may you all be showered in blessings even beyond your ample imagination. And we say Amen. Our daf today is page 13 here in Tractate Sanhedrin, the 24th volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishna number 1 in chapter 1. It's been quite a while. 13 pages on the same Mishna. Let me plug this in here. All because there's so many different kinds of cases covered by this Mishna. Always asking the question, what is the composition of the court, the rabbinic court, the Beis Din, that will rule on these kinds of cases? How many judges are required? That's been the general question. We picked this up at the bottom of page 12b with regard to intercalation on the basis of the season. So we've been talking in the last couple of days about intercalating the year, right? Since the Hebrew calendar runs on the lunar year, so we're going to fall out of sync with the solar year unless we add a month from time to time. 7 out of 19 years require an extra month. And as we learned yesterday, that month is always Adar, the month that contains Purim, and that's the month before Nisan, the month in the springtime, which contains Passover. So if we didn't intercalate the year, if we didn't add these months from time to time, then Passover would end up not being in the springtime, and Sukkot would not end up being in the fall, which they need to be. Yesterday we were talking about other matters that might affect whether the court adds this 1 month or not. that there's a famine, that the grain is ripening early or late that year, that there's been rain damage and the pilgrims will have a tough time getting up to Jerusalem for the festival, etc. These kinds of reasons. Tonight we're talking specifically about keeping the Hebrew calendar's year in sync with the solar year and what are the limits of that. Okay, so Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says the court intercalates the year, meaning adds a month, only if the season of Tammuz, meaning the summer, was lacking its completion for most of the month of Tishrei, meaning that the summer season had begun so late in the calendar that the autumnal equinox, right, September 21st, right, when the 12 hours of day and 12 hours of night are evenly balanced on the first day of fall, that's the autumnal equinox, that it would occur only after most of the month of Tishrei has passed. What that would mean is that most of Tishrei, which contain Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and some part of Sukkot, would have all happened before September 21st, right? Before the fall equinox. And that's typically what we would call Rosh Hashanah coming early, right? When it's all like near the beginning of September, that feels to us like Rosh Hashanah comes early. And if it's going to be too early, that's when they would add an Adar in the previous year to shift Rosh Hashanah down a little bit later in the fall, right? Like these past 2 years, Rosh Hashanah has been quite late. This year, very late. Rosh Hashanah was in October, and that's why we're going to still be in Hanukkah when the solar year turns over from December 31st to January 1st. It's still going to be Hanukkah. In other years, when Rosh Hashanah comes very early, and Hanukkah can be as early as Thanksgiving in the solar year. So what they're saying is, if it's going to be too early, they needed to add a month of an extra Adar. They needed to intercalate the year in the previous spring so that Rosh Hashanah wouldn't come so early, so that it would be pushed and come later. They can tell that that's coming in the earlier year, in the spring, and they would add an Adar so that they wouldn't have that problem later in the fall. And how much is most of the month? What does it mean that most of the month of Tishrei, the month of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, that most of it would have elapsed before the first day of fall? What does that mean, most of the month? 16 days. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda, right? So that would mean that the first day of Sukkot and the second day of Sukkot, first day of Sukkot is on the 15th of Tishrei, and that would have come before, the autumnal equinox, right? If that has happened, then that's early enough that they could add an extra Adar in the previous spring. Now we're on page 13a. That's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. So Rabbi Yosei says the year must be intercalated only if 21 days of Tishrei will pass before the autumnal equinox, right? Meaning that Rosh Hashanah would be like on September 1st. So the Gemara explains, and both of them expounded the same verse to arrive at their respective opinions, that they're going to intercalate the year if Tishrei 16 is before September 21st, or that Tishrei 21 is before, or Tishrei 21 is before September 21st. They arrive at that conclusion from the same verse in the Torah, Exodus 34:22, and the festival of the ingathering at the turn of the year. So they both interpret the verse to mean that the festival of the ingathering, what does this refer to, right? Sukkot, when we live in a sukkah outside, etc., and we, commemorate the fact that God took care of the children of Israel when we came out of Egypt, sheltered us from the sun, and we dwelled in booths, etc. But it's also, it has an agricultural connotation just because of the time of year in which it arrives. So this is called the festival of ingathering. And what does that refer to, specifically? It refers to chol hamoed Sukkot, right? So Sukkot in Israel, the actual festival is the first day of Sukkot. Outside of Israel, it's the first 2 days of Sukkot. Then, once you get into the middle days of Sukkot, when it is not a full-fledged holiday, but neither is it a regular day, and that's why we call them the intermediate days of Sukkot. So the intermediate days of Sukkot, this is called the festival of ingathering in the Torah. So what are they saying? They're saying that that chol hamoed, right? The intermediate days of Sukkot, the days between the festival at the beginning of Sukkot and the festival at the end of Sukkot, which is known as Shmini Atzeres, right? And also Simchas Torah, which in Israel is on the same day. That these intermediate days must all take place, right? Must take place during the season of Tishrei, i.e. during autumn. That you want chol hamoed to arrive after September 21st. Now, one sage, Rabbi Yehuda, holds that we require all of the festival to take place in the new season, i.e. after the equinox. And the other sage, Rabbi Yosef, holds that we require only some of the festival, only some of chol hamoed Sukkot, meaning even 1 day, to take place in the new season. So the year must be intercalated only if the equinox would fall on the 22nd day of Tishrei or later. Now the Gemara asks, what do they each hold? If they hold that the day of the equinox concludes the season, meaning that it is counted as part of the preceding season, then even if the season of Tammuz, meaning summer, is not lacking more than this number of days until its completion, the year would need to be intercalated, right? So what they're talking about now is, so September 21st, we normally call that the first day of fall. But is it? I mean, according to Torah law, do we call that the first day of fall, or do we call it the last day of summer? Basically, summer turns into fall sometime during the equinox day, sometime during September 21st. So do we really add it to the fall, or do we add it to the winter? To the summer. So according to the one who says that we require all of the festival, meaning chol hamoed Sukkot, to take place in the new season, in the fall, well, this is not sufficient to rectify the problem, as the 16th of Tishrei, which is the beginning of chol hamoed Sukkot, is still in the old season. And even according to the one who says that we require only some of the festival to take place in the new season, this is also not sufficient to rectify the problem, since if the equinox occurs on the 21st of Tishrei, the new season begins only on the 22nd, after the festival of the ingathering is over. So rather, they certainly both hold that the day of the equinox begins the new season, right? That it is in fact the first day of fall, not the last day of summer. But the Gemara raises an objection to this conclusion from a different baraisa. The day of the equinox concludes the season. It's the last day of summer, not the first day of fall. And this is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yosef says the day of the equinox begins the new season. So according to this baraisa, Rabbi Yosef says it's the first day of fall, but Rabbi Yehuda says it's the last day of summer. It is therefore clear that they disagree about this issue, and that the previous baraisa must be explained differently. And furthermore, it is taught in a baraisa, Tosefta 2:7, the court intercalates the year only if the season of Tammuz, meaning summer, was lacking its completion for most of the month of Tishrei, right? That summer doesn't end until most of the month of Tishrei has passed. And how much is most of the month? 16 days. Rabbi Yehuda says 2 parts, meaning 2/3 of the month. And how much is 2 parts of the month? 20 days. Since in that case, the day of the equinox would fall on the 21st, and since according to Rabbi Yehuda, the day of the equinox is the last day of the preceding season, the last day of summer, so the new season, fall, would begin on the following day, after the festival of ingathering, which is to say chol hamoed Sukkot, has already ended. So the Baraisa continues, Rabbi Yosei says the court calculates the seasons. And if the winter season of Teves, the month which begins tonight, by the way, which is also before Passover, is lacking its completion for 16 days into the month of Nisan, meaning winter has not ended for 16 days of Nisan, right? When does winter end? First day of spring. So we're talking about March 21st on the solar calendar. And how do we need the lunar calendar, right? The Hebrew calendar to coincide with regards to the first day of spring. So here they're telling you, right, that winter, if it's still going 16 days into Nisan, that would mean that Passover began while it was still winter. That Passover begins before March 21st. No good, because Passover needs to be in the spring, right? So if winter is going 16 days into Nisan, then the court will intercalate the year so that this will not happen, right? So that Passover is in the spring. They'll see that that's coming, and they will intercalate the year, right? They can see that's coming much sooner because, right, spring, which month is it that they add? Adar, which is the month before Nisan. So they can see that that's coming soon, and they will add an Adar so that Nisan will in fact, or that the middle of Nisan, which is Passover, will in fact be in the spring, after the spring equinox. But if the season of Tammuz, meaning summer, which is before the festival ingathering, is lacking its completion. Wait, I want to make sure I'm in the right place now. Did I confuse myself? Hold on a second. Yeah, okay, I'm in the right place. I'm just going to start over that paragraph. Rabbi Yosei says, the court calculates the seasons, and if the winter season of Teves, which is before Passover, is lacking its completion for 16 days into the month of Nisan, the court intercalates the year, so the Passover will occur within the spring. But if the summer season of Tammuz, which is before the festival of ingathering, is lacking its completion for 16 days into the month of Tishrei, the court does not intercalate it. And Rabbi Shimon says, even if the season before the festival of the ingathering is lacking its completion for 16 days into the month of Tishrei, the court does intercalate the year. And the Tana, referred to as acherim, which we've learned elsewhere, that acherim means others, like others say, and this actually refers to Rabbi Meir. And why is he called acherim? Because he got into trouble with the leadership, and they took his name out of certain teachings that had previously been in his name. So, acherim say the year is intercalated even on account of a minority of the month. And how much is a minority of the month? 14 days. So the Gemara concludes, comparing these various baraisas poses a difficulty as they appear to contradict one another. Isn't it saying that, okay, you need Sukkot to happen before the fall starts, right? Before the fall starts, at least part of it. And you need Passover, you need Pesach to happen in the spring, after the spring begins. But by how many days is it going to happen, and when do you make the change? These baraisas are contradicting each other. So what are we going to do? So the Gemara says, the master said that Rabbi Yehuda says the year must be intercalated if the season of Tammuz, if the season of summer, is lacking its completion for 2 parts of the month of Tishrei. Okay, so if summer has not ended by either the 20th or the 21st of Tishrei, you need to add a month. When do you add it? In Adar, right? Like 6 or 7 months before that. That's why they have to see that it's coming and add it then, so that Sukkot won't come too early in the fall, right? Later in the year. Rabbi Yosei says the court calculates the seasons, and if the season of Teves, now we're talking about winter, which is before Passover, is lacking its completion for 16 days into the month of Nisan, the court intercalates the year. Now the Gemara challenges, well, that is the same as the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, since a calculation that shows the winter season of a given year to be lacking its completion for 16 days of Nisan will also show the summer season of that year will be lacking its completion for 20 days of Tishrei. And the Gemara explains, the difference between them concerns the question of whether the day of the equinox concludes the season or the day of the equinox begins the season. Is it the last day of summer or the first day of fall? Is it the last day of winter or the first day of spring? Rabbi Yehuda holds that the day of the equinox concludes the season, and therefore, in the given scenario, the year must be intercalated so that some of the festival of the ingathering will occur in the season of Tishrei, in the fall. But according to Rabbi Yosei, this is not a concern, as the day of the equinox begins the season. Nevertheless, the year must be intercalated so that Passover will occur in the season of Nisan. That Passover will occur in the spring. So the master says, in the continuation of his statement, Rabbi Yosei said, if the summer season of Tammuz, which is before the festival of ingathering, is lacking its completion for 16 days into the month of Tishrei, right? So Sukkot will begin before before the fall begins. Then the court does not intercalate the year. So the Gemara challenges. Rather, according to Rabbi Yosei, if the season before the festival is lacking its completion for 16 days into the month of Tishrei, this is the situation where the court does not intercalate the year. But can one therefore infer that if it is lacking its completion for 17 or 18 days into the month of Tishrei, that the court does intercalate the year? But doesn't he say that the court calculates the seasons? And if the winter season of Tevis, which is before Passover, is lacking its completion for 16 days into the month of Nisan, yes, the court intercalates the year. But if it is lacking for its completion less than that, it should not be intercalated, even if the season before the festival of the ingathering will be lacking 17 or 18 days. So the two elements of Rabbi Yosei's statement appear to contradict one another. And the Gemara answers, no, these inferences are not correct. Rather, in both this case and that case, the court does not intercalate the year. And since it is taught in the first clause 16 days before Passover, it also taught 16 days before the festival of ingathering. But one cannot infer from this that it means 16 days and no more. So the Baraisa teaches that Rabbi Shimon says, even if the season before the festival of ingathering is lacking its completion for 16 days into the month of Tishrei, the court does not intercalate the year. And the Gemara asks, well, if so, this is apparently the same as the opinion of the first Tana. What is the difference between Rabbi Shimon's opinion and that of the first Tana? Now we're on page 13b. So the Gemara answers, well, also here, the difference between them concerns the question of whether the day of the equinox begins the season or whether the day of the equinox ends the season. But their opinions are not defined. Although it is apparent from the Baraisa that these two Tanaim disagree about this issue, is the equinox the last day of the previous season or the first day of the coming season, it is not clear from their words which Tana ascribes to which of these opinions. So, the Baraisa teaches, the Tana referred to as Acherim, meaning Rabbi Meir, says the year is intercalated even on account of a minority of the month. And how much is a minority of the month? 14 days. So the Gemara asks, well, what does Acherim hold? What do Acherim hold? If they hold that the day of the equinox concludes the season, and also that require all of the festival to take place in the new season, this condition is fulfilled even if the season is lacking 15 days. Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak says, Acherim are standing in, meaning they are discussing, the season of Nisan. They're not talking about chol hamoed Sukkot in the fall. They're talking about Pesach in the spring. Where am I? They are talking about Nisan, as it is written, observe the month of spring and keep the Pesach, Deuteronomy 16:1, from which it is inferred, preserve the day of the equinox of the spring to ensure that it will be in the month of Nisan, meaning that the equinox must occur during the first part of the month of Nisan by the 14th, the day that the Paschal offering is sacrificed, right? And so if things are too early and Passover arrives before the first day of spring, no good. We have then violated this requirement in the Torah. So that would be a year where they'd have to intercalate the year to make sure that Passover comes after the first day of spring. So the Gemara asks, well, in a situation like this, why is it necessary to intercalate the year? Very interesting. If Passover is going to arrive one day too early, one day before the first day of spring, why do you have to add a whole month? Why not just intercalate the month of Adar? Meaning add one day to the month of Adar, and then, just have Nisan start, because you can sanctify the month one day later. The Sanhedrin can always hear testimony about starting a month one day earlier or one day later, as we've already discussed. That's that we started by saying, announcing Rosh Chodesh a day later was the first thing that we talked about in terms of the Sanhedrin issuing a verdict regarding the calendar. So if Passover is only arriving one day too early, why not just add one day to Adar rather than adding a whole month of second Adar to the calendar? That's the question they're asking now. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov said, the Tana, whom the Baraisa here refers to as Acherim, again, Rabbi Meir, calculated from the top, meaning the maximum number of days downward. And this is what he is saying. Up to a minority of the month, meaning if the equinox would occur during the final days of Nisan, the court would intercalate the year, meaning add a month, and would also do so if the equinox would occur earlier in the month, unless it would be early enough that only a minority of the month would be in the previous season. And how much is a minority? 14 days. But if the equinox would occur on the 14th, the year is not to be intercalated, but instead a day should be added to the month of Adar. So exactly, if we're only going to be off by one day, you don't intercalate the year. You just intercalate the month, add one day to Adar. So Ravina said, actually, it can be explained that Acherim are standing in the season of Tishrei. They're not talking about Passover. They are talking about Tishrei, right? So the first month of the year in the fall, and we're talking about, is Sukkot going to come too early or too late? So, and they're talking about Tishrei, and they were discussing Sukkot as opposed to Pesach. So Acherim hold that we require all of the festival of Sukkot, including the festival on the first day, not just chol hamoed Sukkot, but all of Sukkot, to take place in the new season. All of Sukkot has to begin after fall has begun. So the Gemara asks, well, how is it possible to say that the festival on the first day, right, meaning the first day of Sukkot, must also be in the new season? It is written the festival of ingathering. That doesn't mean the festival of Sukkot. That means chol hamoed Sukkot, which is referring to the time when the crops are gathered. This can refer only to the intermediate days of Sukkot. So now why do we call the festival of ingathering chol hamoed Sukkot and not Sukkot? Because they're going to gather crops. You can't do that on Yom Tov. You can't do that on the actual festival day on the first day of Sukkot. That would be prohibited. But on the intermediate days, you can do that. That's why it's called the festival of ingathering. So the Gemara answers, they interpret the verse to mean the festival that comes at the time of ingathering, meaning the autumn. So the festival of ingathering doesn't refer to chol hamoed Sukkot. It just refers to Sukkot. Now the Mishnah teaches that and that's where they leave off that discussion. Okay? So thank God you and I aren't on the Sanhedrin and have to figure out when to add a month to the calendar or not, because obviously this is not easy stuff, very complicated and nuanced. And I mean, imagine setting the calendar every year, right, based not only on when was the moon sighted, but these other factors that they would have to take into consideration. And just think how much pressure they would get from different segments of the population, right? Like imagine there's been pretty big and sometimes heated discussions about whether we should have daylight savings time or not, which is just a shift of 1 hour. But imagine if in Washington they were meeting, every month and every year to decide whether they were going to add a month to the year or not, whether they were going to add a day to this month or that month. I mean, there would be so much public outcry and public pressure that they should do, they shouldn't do it this year, not that year, right? And now you start to see why, as soon as they were able to do the astronomical calculations mathematically into the future and set the calendar in advance, and there's no lobbying and no pressure and no Sanhedrin making decisions, the calendar is set until Mashiach comes. Much better for the leadership. Okay, and that's where we leave off that topic. Now we're going back to our Mishnah and the next kind of legal matter that a court would hear and how many judges are required for that. The Mishnah taught the laying of hands, semicha, by the sages is performed by a court of 3 judges according to Rabbi Shimon and 5 judges according to Rabbi Yehuda. So the sages taught in a baraisa, the verse states, this is Leviticus 4:15. And the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands on the head of the bull before the Lord. Now, what are we talking about here? The Sanhedrin that met on the Temple Mount while the temple was standing, and later it met in Yavne and in Tiberia, and it actually moved a few times. It met in other cities as well. But at any rate, the Sanhedrin was responsible for, Jewish law throughout the Jewish world. Now, what if the Sanhedrin made a mistake? What if they deliberated and everyone presented their opinions, and then they voted and they passed some kind of a decree, and then the Jewish world started to follow that law. And then later, something became clear to them that, we made a mistake. If they made a mistake and they published that edict, that means that all the Jews around the world who were following that law were actually not fulfilling their obligation under Torah law. And they were transgressing in some way. For example, the Sanhedrin said that some food is permitted, and later it turned out that it wasn't permitted. Okay, so then everybody ate a food that wasn't permitted. Now, they did so innocently. Obviously, they were following the law as the Sanhedrin had published it. But there needs to be some kind of an atonement made, and the Torah provided for this. So if the elders in the generation, in the Sanhedrin in later generations, make a mistake, so then an atonement is needed, for the nation, and a bull is sacrificed, and then 3 of the elders who participated in making that law and publishing that law lay their hands on that bull before it is brought as a sacrifice in the Holy Temple. So that's what we're talking about. And when they do this ritual, right, judges have to rule that it's necessary. In other words, they're going to rule, we made a mistake. And now this ritual is necessary. I don't know if these are the judges who put their hands on the bull or not. Let's keep reading. That was not clear to me when I read it earlier. Okay. So let's go again. The Mishnah teaches, the laying of hands by the sages is performed by a court of 3 judges, according to Rabban Shimon, and 5 according to Rabbi Yehuda. So the sages taught in the Baraisa, according to Leviticus 4:15, and the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands on the head of the bull before the Lord. Now, one might have thought that the verse is referring to any elders in the marketplace, meaning people who are not members of the Sanhedrin. Therefore, the verse states, elders of the congregation, meaning from among the leaders and judges of the people. If it had written only congregation, one might have thought that they may be the minor ones of the congregation, i.e. members of the lesser Sanhedrin. Therefore, the verse states the congregation, which indicates the unique ones of the congregation, meaning that they must be members of the great Sanhedrin, who lay their hands on the bull. And how many must they be? Well, the verse states, shall lay. In the plural form, a verb can be either plural or singular. So it's plural. This indicates two. Elders, that's in the plural form. That indicates another two. And as a court may not be composed of an even number of judges, they add an additional one to them. So there are 5 judges here. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon says the verse states elders, indicating 2. And as the court may not be composed of an even number of judges, they add an additional one to them. So there are 3 judges here. So the Gemara asks, but according to Rabbi Shimon, isn't it written, and the elders of the congregation shall lay? This word should be included in the derivation. But the Gemara says that word is necessary for the matter itself, to indicate that the elders of the congregation must lay their hands on the bull, and therefore it is not part of the phrase from which the number of judges can be derived. Now the Gemara asks, and what does Rabbi Yehuda respond to this claim? The Gemara answers, it is not necessary to use the word for the matter itself, as if this would be so, that the phrase, and the elders of the congregation shall lay, does not come to be interpreted. It could have written, the elders of the congregation, their hands upon the head of the bull. And it would be understood that the elders lay their hands on the head of the bull. Okay, so how would Rabbi Shimon respond to this? If it were written in this manner, I would say, what is the meaning of on the head of the bull? It means adjacent to the head of the bull, as the term al, here translated as on, often means next to or near to. So then how would Rabbi Yehuda answer? Well, he learns that the hands are placed directly on the bull's head by means of a verbal analogy from the word head in this verse and the word head written in the verse discussing a burnt offering, where the law states that the one bringing the offering must lay his hands literally and forcefully on the animal's head. And what does Rabbi Shimon respond? He does not learn this verbal analogy from the word head in the verse about the elders and the word head in discussing the burnt offering, as he did not receive that tradition from his teachers. And that's all it says about elders laying their hands on the bull that's brought as an atonement when the Sanhedrin passes a law, issues a law that people follow, and it's an error. So what I'm not clear on is, okay, I get that according to one opinion, 3 sages of the Sanhedrin put their hands on the bull, or according to the other opinion, 5 members of the Sanhedrin put their hands on the bull. But how many judges, decide that an error has been made? Perhaps the whole Sanhedrin, since they issued the law and now they're going to create this atonement. Maybe what it means is the whole Sanhedrin has to say we made a mistake, and these 3 or these 5 actually put their hands on the bull, or maybe they need a smaller court. That just wasn't clear to me. Now we're moving on to a different subject. The sages in a Baraisa said or taught the laying of hands, what we just talked about, called semicha, laying of hands on the bull, but it's just referred to as the laying of hands. And now a different phrase, the laying of hands by the sages, are performed by 3 judges. Now we just said that in the laying of hands for this erroneous ruling, it's 3 sages of the Sanhedrin, or 5, have to put their hands on the bull. What does it mean when we're saying that there's a different matter called the laying of hands by the sages? That's what the Gemara is now going to explore. So says the Gemara, what is the laying of hands, and what is the laying of hands by the sages? It is clear that one of these terms is referring to the elders laying their hands on the bull offered for an unwitting communal sin. But what is the meaning of the other expression? Rabbi Yochanan says it is referring to the ordination of elders, meaning to appoint sages and to grant them the title of rabbi, right? So it's still called semicha when a rabbi becomes a rabbi. And it can either happen, because they go through their graduation from some kind of rabbinical seminary, but at a certain point, it's like they receive the tradition, and depending on the institution and who's doing it, some rabbi representing the institution will actually, transfer the title to this new rabbi, this newly minted rabbi. But it's also happened, even in modern times, that a rabbi just grants semicha to a student, without him going to rabbinical school, but this rabbi is satisfied that the new young rabbi has learned enough to be called a rabbi. Now, a lot of people, there are many rabbis in the world, right? Many rabbis now have the title of rabbi. In the ancient world, the title rabbi was reserved for a much smaller group of people. If you were called a rabbi at the times of the Mishna and of the Gemara, you are what would have been called a gadol now, like one of the great rabbis of the generation, one of the great scholars of the generation. But still, when they became that, it was called semicha of the Chachamim. Zakanim. No, wait, I'm sorry. What was it called? Is that what it was called? It's called semicha zakanim, of the elders, right? So here the sages are being referred to as the elders. Okay, so at any rate, that's what we're talking about. So it is clear that one of these terms, Rabbi Yochanan says, it is referring to ordination of elders. So Abaye said to Rav Yosef, from where do we derive that the ordination of elders is performed by 3 judges? Right? So they needed 3 judges to decide this guy's ready to be called rabbi, right? When rabbi really was a very august title. Right? So Abaye said to Rav Yosef, from where do we derive that the ordination of elders is performed by 3 judges? If we say it is from the fact that it is written with regard to Moses when he appointed Joshua, that in Numbers 27:23, quote, and he laid his hands on him and he commanded him. That's how Moses transferred authority to Joshua. So if so, well, it should be enough for one man to ordain the new sage, as Moses ordained Joshua. And if you would say Moses stood in place of 71, meaning that no sage in a later generation could fill the place of Moses, and only the entire great Sanhedrin of 71 judges could fill the role of Moses, well, if that's the case, then every ordination should require 71 judges. So the Gemara responds, the matter is difficult. There is no clear source for this law. Rav Acha, the son of Rava, said to Rav Ashi, do they ordain him literally with the hand? And Rav Ashi said to him, they ordain him by name, by announcing it publicly. He is called rabbi, and they give him permission to adjudicate cases involving the laws of fines, right? So complex matters of civil law. And the Gemara asks, and is it so that one man alone is not able to ordain a rabbi? But doesn't Rav Yehuda say that Rav says, indeed, Baram, indeed, that man will be remembered favorably, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava is his name, as had it not been for him, the laws of fines would have been forgotten from among the Jewish people. And the Gemara challenges that assertion. Would the laws of fines actually have been forgotten? Let them study them so that they will not be forgotten. Rather, his intention was to say, and now we're at the top of 14a, and I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in. The laws of fines would have ceased to be implemented from among the Jewish people, as they would not have been able to adjudicate cases involving these laws due to a lack of ordained judges. And why would that have happened? This is because at one time, the wicked kingdom, which means Rome, issued decrees of religious persecution against the Jewish people with the aim of abolishing the chain of ordination and the authority of the sages. Rome said that anyone who ordains judges will be killed, and anyone who is ordained will be killed, and the city in which they ordain the judges will be destroyed, and the signs identifying the boundaries of that city in which they ordain judges will be uprooted. These measures were intended to discourage the sages from performing or receiving ordination due to fear for the welfare of the local population. Even if they were willing to risk their own lives to ordain a new generation of judges, They were risking that whatever city they did this in, the whole city would be destroyed and the people murdered. I mean, Rome was a seriously wicked empire, as described here, right? So you can see that what the Romans were trying to do was really to end the whole chain of transmission of Torah law from one generation of sages to another. And if they had been successful in that, Jews without a Jewish leadership might have quickly lost their way and ultimately been assimilated, and would be the end of the Jewish people. So what did Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava do when all the other existing sages were too afraid because of these edicts of Rome to ordain a new generation of sages? What did Yehuda ben Bava do? What did Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava do? He went and he sat between two large mountains, between two large cities, and between two Shabbos boundaries, between Usha and Shepharim, right? So he wasn't in or near any city. He was in, the wilderness between cities. So they, even if they got caught and the sages were all killed, at least they would not be able to, attribute blame to any city for this happening in it. So this happened between the cities of Usha and Shepharim, in a desolate place that was not associated with any particular city, so that he did not endanger anyone directly involved. And what did he do? He ordained 5 elders. And who were they? Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yosei, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua. It was brave of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava to ordain these 5 sages, and it was very brave of them to become ordained, because they were literally risking their lives to do it. Now, this incident is mentioned here to show that one man can ordain new rabbis. So why are you saying that you need a court of 3 to do that? When their enemies discovered them, Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava said to the newly ordained sages, "My sons, run," meaning run for your lives. They said to him, "My teacher, what will become of you?" Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava was elderly. He was unable to run. He said to them, "In any case, I am cast before them like a stone that cannot be overturned. Even if you attempt to assist me, I will not be able to escape due to my frailty. I'm just too old to run with you. But if you do not escape without me, you will also be killed, and then there will be no sages. What do we do all this for? Get out of here," so that it was for some, so that it was, it's a meaningful act. It's not for naught. So they ran, and they were the ones who transmitted the tradition to the next generation. Yehuda ben Bava was successful, and he was very successful. I mean, these were some of the greatest sages in our history: Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbi Yosei, as well as Rabbi Elazar ben Shemu. I mean, incredible what they did and how important this moment was in Jewish history. And people say about this incident, the Roman soldiers did not move from there until they had inserted 300 iron spears into Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, making him appear like a sieve pierced with many holes. I mean, he was martyred on that day, and he was a real hero of the Jewish people. Now, as a proof that one man can ordain a judge, he doesn't need a court to do that, this proof is refuted. There may have been other sages performing this ordination with Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, who were added in order to reach the quota of 3 sages, and this fact that they were not mentioned is due to the honor of Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, who was martyred on that day, and who was also greatest among them. Now the Gemara asks, and with regard to Rabbi Meir, did Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava actually ordain him? But doesn't Rabbah bar Chana say that Rabbi Yochanan says, anyone who says that Rabbi Akiva did not personally ordain Rabbi Meir is nothing other than mistaken? And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Akiva did in fact ordain Rabbi Meir, but he did so when Rabbi Meir was so young that the people did not accept his appointment. And so Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava ordained him a second time later, and then the people accepted it. And that's where we'll knock off for today. Take a few questions. Here. Give me a second while Google Docs reloads. I always try to remember to do the reload when I say I'm going to take questions now. Sometimes I forget. Okay, Jonathan, regarding the equinox, I've been wondering if there was anything in Judaism that recognizes solar events in the year, such as the equinox or the solstice. I think this gives us at least a little of an answer that it really aligned with the seasons. Spring holidays needed to be in the spring and Sukkot needed to be in the fall. Are there any examples that I am missing? Yes, indeed. We turn over within the Shemona Esrei, the Amidah prayer, in the prayer about, may this year be a year of blessings, from Saint Bracha to Saint Talumatar Lebracha, on either December 4th or 5th. It's tied to the solar year and to the winter solstice, right? So there is a change in the liturgy that happens every year, depending on whether it was a solar leap year or not, on either December 4th or 5th. And that's just one more example of what you're asking for, where something happens within the Hebrew year that is actually tied to the solar year. Sharon, the Jewish calendar is really a luni-solar calendar, right? Lunar/solar, as it has aspects of both. However, the holiday of Hanukkah's observance is based on the holiday of Sukkot, as they could not properly observe the holiday of Sukkot when the Syrian Greeks had defiled the temple. Right. That, the idea that it would have an 8-day dedication was tied to Sukkot. At the time of Sukkot, they weren't able to observe Sukkot because they were still at war and the temple had been defiled, and then they were only finally able to do that, a couple of months later, on the 25th of Kislev, which is when Hanukkah comes out. And Hanukkah is the only holiday that includes within it the change from one month to another, right? Rosh Chodesh comes down during Hanukkah. That's something that we don't see during Sukkot or Pesach. Jonathan, in an Aish Latino article, it said that there were 3 things the Greeks prohibited: Shabbos, circumcision, and intercalating the months. Very interesting that we're reading this during Hanukkah, right? That this is how the Greeks, right? We just talked about how the Romans sought, to destroy the Jews and to destroy Judaism. Right, much earlier, 200 to 300 years earlier, we had the Greeks doing that, and that's what led to the Hanukkah story. And so interesting that you get that Shabbos, right? It's it's what we do every week, and in so many ways it defines us as Jews. Circumcision, an actual physical change of all of the males, and is intercalating the calendar at that level of such a important and well-known Jewish practice. Answer, yeah, right? Yeah, because as we were discussing earlier, think how important it is that there's an authority, a Jewish authority, that's setting the calendar, and that the whole Jewish world is waiting to find out, when is next month going to begin? Is Rosh Hashanah going to come early or late this year? Is Passover going to come, just a day after spring begins or a month after spring begins? That obviously affects everyone's life in a huge way, and now you can see why the Greeks would have banned that practice. Sharon, I taught a school year-long class for pre-B'nai Mitzvah students, right, students studying for their bar mitzvah, on mitzvahs, on the commandments. And the first commandment given to the Jewish people was to keep a calendar, Exodus 12:2. This shall be for you the first of months. Says Sharon, we looked very carefully at the calendar and why this should be the first commandment. And a very wise student remarked that up until that time, they were slaves, unable to plan their own time. This would be a new reality for them to have to plan their own time, and for the nation, right, to set its own calendar is to say that's a free nation under God, right? But under no other nation, under the power of no other nation. Thank you so much, Sharon. And Bill, finally, during the period when the title rabbi was exceptionally rare, what was the title for one's local spiritual leader? Were they just judges, or was there another word? Or did that particular role simply not develop until later? That's a great question, Bill. I don't know. I don't know the answer offhand. I think it's interesting that the sages in Eretz Yisrael were called rabbi, and the sages in Bavel were called Rav. Right? So Rav is a little bit more like my teacher. It also says in Pirkei Avos that you should have for yourself a Rav. Right? What does that mean? It means you have to have a rabbi in your life to ask him questions. He's your Rav. Right? So it's funny, like now Rav is a mark of enhanced respect. That of all the rabbis, you're my Rav. But then it was like saying, well, we can't ordain judges at the level of the judges, of the rabbis in Israel, because we're a community outside of Israel. So it's understood to be, a little bit lower than rabbi. And so perhaps the term Rav was used for what you're talking about. But I'm guessing, I'm not sure. That's what I've got for us tonight. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, New Year's Eve, on the solar calendar. And we'll just meet at the regular time. I don't think I'm going to change it. We'll meet at the regular time. And maybe Nina and I will make a l'chaim, because she and I met on New Year's Eve of the solar calendar. And I'm so thankful, honey, that I bumped into you on New Year's Eve all those years ago. All the best, my holy sisters and brothers. Chodesh Tov and Hanukkah Sameach.